Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the second day of the ASO convention. Really hope you all enjoyed your first day and are looking forward to the next day. It is a bit of an early session, and I know a lot of people haven't seen each other in a long time, and there were a few social functions planned for last night, so it's good to see some people actually made it to the early session today. I think just a big thank you before we start to the sponsors, SA3, Discovery, Sapiens, Willis Towers Watson, who's also the sponsor for the session and is going to be presenting this morning for us. Ernix, RNA Analytics, Sanlam, Insight, Accurate, Genry, MBE Consulting, Cycle, Liberty, Milliman, Old Mutual, RGA, Swiss Re, Hanover Re, SAL, Colorfield, Africa Re, Communicate Recruitment, Network Finance, and Insights Actuaries and Consultants. Sure, that's a mouthful. Hello, Gugu. Sorry. So a few things just to note about the exhibition hall as well. Please go visit all the exhibition stands. There's a lot of nice gifts that's there for everyone to be handed out, and engage with all the sponsors. They're very keen to discuss and engage with all of you, and also pick up a parking ticket from the guardrabe should you need one this morning. Everyone's also looking forward to the Centre Court cocktail function this evening. But there's also been a request that if you do have a ticket and you are not going to be attending, please go back to the registration and just donate your ticket. There are a lot of people that's very keen to attend on your behalf. The finals of the ASA Chess Championship for 2025 is also taking place today. So please go have a look if you're interested during the first morning refreshment break. And with that, I'll hand over to the amazing Gugu Mhlungu.
Morning, everyone. So we start this morning's programming with a presentation titled Balancing Pricing Sophistication with Simplicity. It's to be delivered by Annalise Bedwell. So please do give Annalise a warm welcome to the stage.
Cool. Thank you for the introduction, and good to see so many people come out at a nice early start. Cool. So our sophisticated pricing algorithms are always complex. And a key theme that's come out of, sort of emerged outside of the UK market is the sort of increasing complexity of pricing algorithms. And often this is sort of due to, I don't know, changes in the regulatory requirements or things like that, but also just advancements in sort of the technologies that we're using. And whilst this has enabled more, I don't know, predictive risk and retail modelling, or more sort of accurate lifetime value calculations and things like that, it's also introduced challenges. Challenges that mean, it's harder to build these algorithms with control and sort of clarity. And often this is sort of impacting an insurer's speed to market. And we sort of see South African insurers beginning to embark on a similar journey. The goal to elevate your pricing sophistication without introducing additional complexity that's really hard to sort of manage and adapt these algorithms as you sort of advance them. And although the market dynamics do differ, and don't worry, I'm not going to talk about the UK market very much, we do see a sort of gap in pricing sophistication. And so we see an opportunity here for South African insurers to sort of adopt the best practices and create really sustainable pricing systems that incorporate this sophistication. So I want to spend today's time talking through sort of how to strike that right balance between clarity and control and a sophisticated algorithm, and also sort of why that clarity is just as important as maybe the technical accuracy of your model. Sorry, I don't actually know how to do this. Which button do I need to press? It's not changing the slide. I feel like I've tried all the buttons.
Maybe team, can you there we go.
Oh no, okay, we're moving. Okay, cool. So I want to introduce something which we're kind of calling the pricing hypercycle. And this is a journey through the evolution of pricing systems and the sort of implications of that on simplicity, interpretation, interpretability, and generally just speed to market. So we're going to measure this against average cycle length. And we'll start with the sort of pre-modern era. And this is where our rating algorithms are sort of rigid and purpose-built. And simple pricing changes might take sort of 6 to 8 weeks to implement, with larger, more structural changes or risk model refreshes sort of happening maybe 6 to 12 months. And making pricing changes in these algorithms can be sort of time-consuming and error-prone, with bottlenecks where you need to replicate your rates into your front-end system or sort of reconcile your data across various different platforms. And what we see is, as insurers begin to sort of push the boundaries of what's technically possible within this framework, the sort of complexity sort of increases and this average cycle length begins to go up. And I think a number of South African insurers are sort of sitting in this era. But next we have the modern era with externalized rating. And this is a game changer, right? It allows pricing teams to make changes in as little as 1 day, if you wanted, with maybe larger, more structural changes happening sort of every 1 to 3 months. And why do we see this sort of leap in speed? Well, it's down to that integrated pricing suite. We have this centralized control and one sort of source of data, and we don't need to be doing so many of those reconciliation exercises. And actually, to make a pricing change, often we don't need any involvement from IT. And so what we see is this average cycle length dramatically begin to decrease. And again, a number of South African insurers are sort of sitting here on this hypercycle. But then we sort of move on into this, don't really have a name for it, but maybe the data science-led phase. And this is where rating is still externalized, but it's now supported by multiple other additional systems. We might carry out our analysis across various different platforms, and maybe we host our predictive models externally. And so despite all these innovations, we actually see is that complexity creeping back in. We now need to reconcile our data again, and we need to require handovers between teams and systems. And so as that complexity creeps back in, and our cycle length begins to increase again. I've got an anecdote from a large UK insurer that I've worked with who managed to create such a complex rating algorithm that nobody in their business actually understood that end-to-end pricing algorithm. You become sort of hyperfixated on improving sophistication, eking out bits of value everywhere, that actually you create an algorithm that's unintelligible and really hard to maintain and sort of make changes going forward. So bringing this back to the South African market, as I sort of said, I think the majority of insurers are sort of sitting around here. Some are yet to externalize their rating, so sitting on that left-hand side. And whilst many are sort of using a lot of the techniques and the data science, more model building approaches, very few are actually implementing this directly into their live pricing. And so the goal is to increase our pricing sophistication without introducing those complexities, because once we see those sort of start to come in, maybe not keeping our technical debt under control and things like that, we see our number of risk events sort of begin to increase and our testing requirements increase. We need greater amounts of resource, and our algorithms become harder to maintain and even harder to review. So as we look to sort of evolve our pricing algorithms, we need to be deliberate. We want to introduce these new techniques, but without introducing that additional complexity. Let's flip that perspective for a second. I'm going to look at the chart where we've got complexity along the bottom, and we're moving from simple to complex. And on this right-hand side, we'll have what we're calling the danger zone. And this is where our pricing algorithms become so complex that rating errors creep in, become slower to make changes, and our costs escalate. And why do we see people sort of end up in this zone? It can kind of be a number of reasons. It might be just that you're operating in a sort of ever increasingly competitive environment. It might be that you don't have the resource and the time to sort of achieve the goals that you want to and sort of keep that technical debt under control. Or it might be that there's inconsistent approaches to complexity across the business. And what determines the sort of size of that region, or how close we can get to it before we sort of tip into these risks? Well, that is kind of different for everyone. It depends on your organisation size, your resources, and your talent pool. So what I'm going to introduce is the idea of a complexity budget, the amount of complexity that your business can absorb without tipping over into that inefficiency or risk. And we're going to measure this against value. So ultimately profit, but it could be the value of your insights or the accuracy of your predictions. And up the top here, we're going to have what we call sort of where good pricing lives: accurate, actionable, and profitable. Now, naturally over time, as I've sort of said, we see people drifting towards this complex zone, this danger zone, maybe just through sort of additional technical debt, that sort of thing. Let's say we start down here. Ideally, every pricing change that we make gives us value, but doesn't pile on complexity. So we move upwards on this chart. But in reality, every pricing change that we make generally might gain us some value, but piles on some complexity. And if we're not careful, we might end up somewhere towards this danger zone. So the key question here, and what I want to explore today, is how do we spend that complexity budget wisely? We're going to focus on 3 key areas where we think South African insurers can do just that, where you can adopt the best practices and create sustainable pricing systems. Cool. So the first is value-add use of machine learning. When used appropriately, machine learning could bring improved loss ratios through just more accurate modelling, could allow us to refresh our risk models more frequently, might allow better insight and risk identification, and potentially, most importantly, more time that we can reinvest into innovation and R&D. But as with anything, there are risks. Yes, we might see improved loss ratios, but at what cost? Well, we might see our customer experience worsen, perhaps through models that are exploiting hidden biases or producing extreme predictions. Our prices might actually become volatile and unstable. And, we might not be able to sort of explain how a price was derived, particularly to a customer or a regulator. And operationally, things might slow down, rating errors might creep in, and our pricing team might actually struggle to interpret our model outputs. So, what are the ingredients to ensure that machine learning is adding value? There are 4 things that I sort of want to discuss, and I'm going to use the examples of gradient boosting machines, but really these concepts could be applied to any machine learning technique or data science tool that you might be using. The first is using the right tool in the right way for the right task. So we could consider using a GBM to build a retention model. And the GBM might do a really good job of picking up lots of complex interactions, and that might mean that elasticity is captured well, and when testing on an unseen set of data, it actually performed better than my GLM that I had before. But when we start to investigate further and understand the impacts of that model, we might notice some unintuitive trends. Perhaps for some customers, as we increase our price, we actually see their retention prediction increasing. And we could go back to the modelling stage and we could say, okay, let's apply some monotonic constraints to try and stop this happening. But if our price test factor is involved in lots of complex interactions, then might be really difficult to enforce this. So this might be an example of where using the right tool might not be the most sophisticated model form, but we can use the insights from our GBM to inform our GLM, or maybe use it for a starting point. The second is a constant focus on the sources of commercial value. I think there are two sort of trains of thought here. So one would be about where else can I apply machine learning techniques within the business, maybe sort of behavioral modeling or claims triaging. And I'll come on to those in a little bit in the next section. But the most important thing here, I think, is making sure that the use of machine learning doesn't become a button-clicking exercise, and that the pricing teams that are using these tools are understanding what the models that are being built, they're able to dissect the interactions and understand the expected impacts. The third is making sure that domain expertise is captured. Your pricing team likely has years of experience in building robust pricing models using well-established techniques. And it's really important that we continue to sort of incorporate that domain knowledge. So we could spend the time, and you might have in the past, in creating sort of well-thought-out, domain-informed features. If we take a buildings product, for an example, we could create a composite indicator combining number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and maybe some other features. And often what we see is these nuanced features actually sort of capture that real-world value more accurately and might not have been so easily surfaced by model forms like GBMs. And that's why sort of embedding our knowledge and doing things like feature engineering is still important, because it allows us to embed our own understanding of the market and the product dynamics directly into the modeling, hopefully leading to not just a more interpretable model, but a better model. And the fourth is applying intelligent pragmatism throughout. When people make the decision to start using GBMs, the majority of the value that they're getting is actually coming from making that decision, from moving to a more predictive model form, rather than that extra bit of value that you're getting through things like exhaustive tuning. We see clients get hung up on building the best possible model, spending ages tuning and creating potentially what is an overfit model. Making careful decisions, such as using sensible hyperparameters which avoid overfitting, might actually yield more value than spending that time on the hyperparameter tuning. Not always, but sometimes. I would say if you could reinvest that time that you're sort of spending, if you are going to that nth degree, in understanding your model outputs and the trends that, and the behaviors you're expecting, that would be far more valuable to your business than the most predictive model possible. So how do we actually achieve this? Well, it starts with education and culture, building teams who understand both the tools and the environment that they're working in. And it requires a robust infrastructure with the tools and the technology to support experimentation as well as validation and deployment. And something to avoid is political mandates and sort of deadlines to force machine learning into places that people aren't ready for yet. The second area is data science outside of pricing. So there are lots of use cases for data science within pricing, but I want to talk a bit more about outside of replacing those established pricing exercises. Sometimes what we see is companies set up distinct data science teams, separate from their pricing teams. And these data science teams are very good at fitting predictive models, let's say. And so maybe they refit some risk models using light GBM, and they're very good models. But then you have a pricing team who isn't actually in control of the pricing. And maybe they're handed these models that they didn't build, and maybe they didn't understand. And so you've lost a bit of that learning exercise. And then you have a data science team who might not have the domain knowledge to know where else they can sort of use their skills and their time. And so when setting up these teams, it's just worth being considerate about where certain activities are best sitting. So 2 areas that are pretty well understood, where we can sort of add value with data science are fraud detection. So using machine learning models to identify areas where there's sort of suspicious patterns in claiming behaviour or customer behaviour. And claims triaging in operations, so using predictive models to sort of route our claims more efficiently. But where else can we add value with data science? Here's a few ideas. I'm not going to talk through these. Don't think I have the time, but there's one in particular that I think is interesting, and that's sort of facilitating automation. And that leads me on to the third key area. So looking back at this value against complexity chart that we sort of saw before, we really see automating sort of pricing processes as a way to add value without piling on that additional complexity, particularly if we are automating the right things. One idea is to automate our monitoring. We're seeing a lot of insurers start to turn their attention to this, particularly those insurers who are seeing diminishing returns from sort of increasing the pricing sophistication that they have in their algorithms. You know, those insurers who are sitting on that right-hand side of that hypercycle we saw earlier. And what do I mean by automated monitoring? I mean creating well-designed processes that allow the automated monitoring of the end-to-end pricing algorithm, but also our data streams and our sort of management information. And this needs to be well integrated into our business such that it provides us the alerts and the direction to direct our resources to the most valuable areas. There are 4 sort of key areas of the business where I think automated monitoring can be really beneficial. The first is governance and compliance space. So we could do things like automating the demonstration of regulatory compliance, or we could look to automate checks on our data streams and our sort of algorithm working correctly as a whole. Things like being able to compare the exposure distributions of our quote data from yesterday against the previous week and sort of flagging any really big changes in that sort of thing. Particularly on if we've got any sort of third-party data streams coming in, making sure that all of that looks like it's working. And what this does is it really means that we can sort of gain confidence and confident in our pricing algorithm and the calculations that are being done. Second is model monitoring and maintenance. So this is really about having the capabilities to understand how your models are performing on an ongoing basis. So being able to identify if one of our risk models is starting to perform badly, and what impact is that actually having on my rating accuracy as a whole. It might allow us to do things like monitor trend inflation assumptions and different trend assumptions. And maybe it allows us to monitor the stability of our models. So how, if we were to fit our models on a slightly different subset of data, how similar are the prices that it's going to produce. The third is active portfolio management. So this is about understanding and reacting to changes and getting those early warning indicators of underperforming underwriting segments. It might allow us to spot multidimensional trends that we would find really hard or maybe even impossible to spot otherwise. And then finally, there's automated modeling space. So this is sort of taking the model monitoring piece a little bit further. So maybe we've identified that one of our models is beginning to perform badly. So in the background, this process could go away, refit this model on the latest data. It can do all of the checks that you would do, and then it would implement it into your pricing algorithm on an offline basis, and produce all those impacts that you need to see what would happen if I did update that model. And whether you're using that automated model to then sort of live price, or whether it just helps you direct your resource to the most valuable areas, that's some real key kind of insights that you're getting from that without having to do anything, essentially. So there's the 4 sort of areas of automated monitoring where we see it being really beneficial. And that's the 3 key areas where I think that South African insurers have an opportunity to really elevate these areas. So as you do look to evolve your pricing algorithms and incorporate these new techniques, make sure you are being deliberate and you're not increasing complexity unnecessarily. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Good morning. Thank you for an interesting talk. I was wondering whether this space that you were talking about, who do you see own this in business? Is it data scientists, statisticians, actuaries, engineers? Who's owning this space and calling the shots?
On the data science side of like integrating that into your business? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think with the splits sort of between separating out the data science team and the pricing team and things like that, that's not necessarily the wrong thing to be doing. I think it just needs careful thought about what happens if we do remove certain activities that have been typically a pricing-based activity and moving it over here. Yes, maybe that's the right thing to do in terms of productivity and building the best models and sort of keeping up with an ever-increasingly competitive environment. But what does that actually mean if my pricing team is no longer building those models? What knowledge are they losing? And I don't know, I typically see that when people start building GBMs, the people that know how to build GLMs and have gone through that process of understanding what they're fitting when they're building those models is really important, and that's a great stepping stone to creating, sensible GBMs where, it's not just here's the most predictive model and there's lots of nonsensical trends in there. So I think however you divide up that responsibility, being very deliberate in what activities are sitting under where is really important.
Hi. I just wanted to go back to your discussion about the complexity of models and where companies are. I've sort of some experience, some very different companies, both, for example, very profitable, but on very different pricing journeys and wavelengths. One insurer I work for, for them, they would have mainly like a standalone motor portfolio. And they would say, listen, a good year, if we have a good year, we get a 43% loss ratio. And that sounds insane in other organizations where a standalone motor loss ratio, a good one is like 70, and they're like, let's target a 62 or something, maybe on motor as a whole. There's a massive difference in loss ratio expectation and what's good. For 2 companies, both profitable and playing in the exact same, very similar space. The insurance space. So, I mean, for me, one thing I learned from their company is that they definitely went complex with calculations, but simple with inputs and outputs. So it can be replicated. If you get a new staff member, they can see what the previous one did, and it's easy to actually use a complex model. And they also do things we don't want to use AI as the general message, to the public, but internally there are various pricing actuaries that are heavily involved with AI software and heavily engaging, but it's quite hush-hush. And that's the complex calculation part that they do. And then they use the complex calculation and then convert it to a simple language, input-output. and just plug it on like another layer of optimization, just random layers. So it's no like GLM base. It's like maybe a GLM that was done many years ago with another crazy level of complex calculation, with another method, completely random, that like now AI is showing you something new, some new method. So it's just optimizations. And then the strange thing that they've now gone on their journey is that they feel like their costs, because their profits are high, but the costs, at a 43% loss ratio, you expect to be making insane amount of money, for any other insurer, but their costs are so high because they've invested in all this data science and actuaries, and they got massive structures and layers. So the interesting thing now in their journey, they said, listen, that cost seems insane. We're not actually an insurer anymore. We're slowly becoming an employer of actuaries, because the cost, dynamic of your 100%, sort of combined ratio, if you want to take out the different elements, eventually you're actually an employee of actuaries instead of an insurance provider, because your loss ratio becomes so low and your actuary bill becomes so high. Or actually data science, statisticians, IT, all of the areas they've got optimization, going. Yeah, so I mean, for me, the question really is that I'm not convinced that many companies, certainly the profitable ones that will last, will go to that complex level on that diagram where you're actually saying that it can't be replicable or somebody new coming in. I think they've built in very nice, rules and ways of engaging to actually pull this thing back. So it's simple inputs, simple outputs, but very complex and very layered that nobody can really describe what their pricing model looks like. It's just a GLM with optimization, and optimization is like the nth degree of levels and forms and shapes. So my question is more of a reflection, but I mean, I don't know if you agree with that. I'm just maybe my question is that those companies that are all going to that complex models, they won't survive, they won't be profitable, they will shut down. So it's going to be very short-lived if you observe in this. In fact, it's probably a red flag that these companies are actually losing the plot and, are actually aiming for total shutdown. Yeah, thanks.
I think that summarizes it fairly nicely in that, you can use these techniques and incorporate them into your business, but you need to be able to sort of implement that in a way that's simple and people can understand, and they can come into your business and understand how you are pricing and what that end-to-end journey is. I don't necessarily think that avoiding all of those techniques is going to be the right answer either. I think it's important to be sort of experimenting and using those and like you say, implementing them in as simple as a way as possible. So, cool.
Thank you very much for your questions, and Annelies, thank you very much for your presentation. In a short moment, we'll have you'll have just under 10 minutes to transfer to the next concurrent session. And also, your apps should be updated as of 8:30. There have been some changes to the program. So the refreshment break that's coming up a little bit later on at 9:15, the times have changed. It's a little bit longer. There's also been an impact in terms of the length of the plenary and the president's address that's happening a little bit later on. And also the lunch break has also been made a little bit longer. So if you do have the app, please kindly have a look just to see what those changes have been to the refreshment break, the plenary, and the lunch break. And then we'll see you at 8:45 for the start of the next session. And thank you very much to our sponsor for making this presentation possible. That's our gold sponsor, WTW. Thank you.